Hello, everyone. Dave Goulas, Beyond Fulfillment Podcast, special edition, Trump's impact on the supply chain. Back again with my good friend Jim Tompkins. Welcome, Jim.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
Fantastic. How about yourself?
Half crazy and fantastic as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it seems like every week we do this, things get crazier and more intense in terms of the pace. And this week alone, so much has happened regarding the tariffs, right? So steel and aluminum went into effect this week. There was some concessions made specifically with Mexico. Canada, Trudeau is out. They're awaiting the new prime minister there. There was some back and forth with the premier of Ottawa, threatening to shut off electricity. Trump then doubled the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and then that changed shortly thereafter. Now he's heading to Washington, we understand, to talk to Lutnick. And again, if you're not keeping up by the hour, something else potentially has changed. So like you said, it can make your head spin. But with everything we've seen thus far, even this week, like what do you make of all that's going on?
Well, I'm glad you went there, Dave, because I tell you, if you went, give me a detailed explanation of what's going to happen in the Canada tariffs, I would be in deep trouble because, oh my, there's so much going on all at once. Okay, so we hear people saying, isn't Canada and in Mexico, aren't they friends? They're our neighbors. Absolutely, they're our friends. At the same time, what we need to do is we need to look at where our trade is and where our trade deficits are. Our two largest trading partners in the United States, number one is Mexico, which we trade with Mexico $840 billion. That's the largest trade partner we have in the world. Number two large trade partner is Canada, which has $762 billion of trade between the US and Canada. So number one and number two are Mexico and Canada. And then China is number three from the point of view of amount of trade with the United States at 582. So why would one want to talk about looking at Mexico, Canada, and China? It's because those are the three largest trading partners we have. Now, if we look at those three largest trading partners, how are we performing? The largest trade deficit in the world with the US is with China, and that's at 295 billion. 295 trillion. That's one sixth of the total US trade deficit. The total US trade deficit negative is about 1.2 trillion. So 295 of that comes from China. Number two is Mexico at 171 billion. And so that's number one and number two. Now, to get down to Canada, we got to drop down and get number nine. Okay, but number nine is Canada at 63 billion. And so if we take China, number one, Mexico trade deficit negative, number two, and Canada, which is number three at 63 billion, if we add those three together, we get $529 billion of trade deficit. That's 44% of the total. And these three kind of have an interesting working together because the amount of trade we're doing with these three. If we can adjust these three and get favorable deals from Canada, Mexico, and China, we're going to make a huge dent in the overall trade deficit. To round out the top 10, it would include number three, Vietnam, number four, Ireland, number five, Germany, number six, Taiwan, number seven, Japan, number eight, South Korea, number nine is Canada, and then India is number 10. But if we took those 10 and the total trade deficit of our 1.2 trillion, 90% of that, 1 trillion 81 billion of the 1.2 trillion comes from those 10 countries. And so we need to look at those. Now we see some there is in Europe, some is in Asia. And so it's kind of split around the world. And so a logical thing to do in opening the discussion is trying to get our two friends, Canada and Mexico, to work with us to reduce these trade deficits and then to go after the real enemy, the one with 295 billion trade deficit, and work on that. So I absolutely get Trump's philosophy of Mexico, China, and Mexico, Canada, boom, boom, boom. Let's get things moving. And then let's also go heavy after China and to begin the game. And so what's happening so far? Our friends are the ones that are pushing back harder. We're finding more retaliation coming from Canada and Mexico than we are from China at this point. Now, that's because it's the opening round. Trump has said April 2nd is when we're going to really look at the reciprocal tariffs, and that's when the game begins. Up until then, it's just posturing. And so that's what we're doing at this point. We're posturing, but it's important we understand we are favored. We got the biggest lineman, and we are fighting against the three people we should be fighting against at this point, in my opinion. And so it's a really good start, but trying to predict which one is going to happen today and what's going to happen at 4 o'clock and what's going to happen at 6 o'clock. I mean, we could get our heads spinning here and get real confused. Trump is on the right path to trying to reduce substantially our trade deficits, and that's what he's promised he would do. And so I fully support what he's doing at this point.
And I think if nothing else, we've seen not only with the events this week, but even some other, stuff that over the last couple months, when people push back and try to, you know what I mean? I guess retaliate in like just like the premier shutting off the electricity and then the steel tariffs doubled temporarily. I mean, one thing we've seen from Trump, particularly that like this second term, he is not afraid to double down and basically throw the US's weight around in terms of being the largest GDP in the world and understanding the type of leverage he has. He's not afraid to throw that around and make it known that he'll double down right away.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important that we watch the reactions from Canada and Mexico because everyone else in the world is watching those reactions and how we respond to those reactions and also how we're dealing with China. I think at this point, China is actually doing a much better job of negotiating by kind of keeping it low key as opposed to the Mexico and Canadian thing. Mexico's doing better than Canada. Canada's not doing a good job at this point. They're getting emotional and riled up, and you know it's not really playing into Canada's strong suit at this point. There is an issue here, though, that I think is somewhat confusing. When Trump is when he was 45, we created the US, USMCA new trade deal, replacing the old one. In that trade deal, we looked at the North American automotive supply chain. And we truly looked at it as North America being one country. And so the product goes from, Mexico to the United States to Canada, back to the United States, back to Mexico. It goes back and forth the borders multiple times in the supply chain before we get a final car. And so for Trump now to say he wants to assure that the U.S. automotive supply chain is, in fact, playing into the favor of U.S. trade balance and trade deficits. He's got a problem there because we don't have a U.S. automotive supply chain. We have a North American automotive supply chain. And so it's a misset, and he knows this. He's not confused. He knows what he's doing very well. But what he's doing is he's saying that, we need to work on the U.S. automotive supply chain, and that's not going to work. We need to look at the North American. If we're going to look at the U.S. automotive supply chain, we need 3 years to align that, build factories and build aluminum and steel plants. And I mean, there's a huge amount of change going on there. So we need to watch that carefully too, because the other countries are going to be coming to the table with knowledge about their circumstances, and how do we play that? So when is Trump playing for the news, and when is he playing with the real negotiations? I would suggest until April 2nd, it's just all a bunch of discussion. It's useful. Trump is building up some momentum. I support what he's doing, but I don't think we should get excited about this number or that number. And in fact, I don't think the stock market should be doing what it's doing. I think Wall Street is getting somewhat fanatical, because nothing has been done yet. The game hasn't started. Let's at least watch the first 5 minutes of the game before we make our predictions.
Yeah, and certainly, and we've seen, like you said, the stock market has been extremely volatile. The news, of course, is doing what the news does, and we understand news is a business, and fear and bad news sells, and shocking headlines, right? So that's clearly a lot of what's going on. But so. Another question because you brought up the USMCA, and that was another thing too, where I heard that specific agreement is also being renegotiated as part of this whole thing. So that'll be interesting to see how it plays out. But when the whole spat with Canada was going on yesterday, yet again there's this case being made for the value of Canada becoming the 51st state that Trump made. And now, what do you make of that? I mean, do you think again that's more just bravado and more than anything else, or do you think there's a real possibility that they're angling towards that?
Well, I'm a supply chain guy, and when I get outside of my area of expertise, I can get in trouble in a hurry. But I believe that Trump doesn't really think they should become a 51st state. I think he was just taking his position. He's great at posturing and getting the other side warmed up for the real discussion. Trump really hasn't until now had his team in place. Do you notice, Rubio's doing the Ukraine thing. Lutnick is going to do the meetings with Canada. We've got Secretary Benson doing. I mean, he now has his team aligned, and he now has his team in the front of the discussions. And so I think it's going to be much less of Trump's in brief, talking in the Oval Office or talking on Air Force One or something that's in the news, and much more substantial, real negotiation on the issues now. So I think we're going to find that Greenland is going to maintain an independent com- country, but we're going to have a lot of minerals coming from there. I think there's some really interesting deals we can do with Canada with minerals, and trading minerals for maybe some negative balance of trade, maybe looking by the aluminum and steel deficit with Canada. I think Mexico, actually, we're making some progress there, because of the president of Mexico is really eager to make sure she doesn't harm her economy. So I think there's a lot of good things going on. I think the stock market, the talk of recession, Trump has been pretty candid. It's been hard for him to say, I don't want to predict a recession. That's not good business. But is there going to be a price to pay for all this? Sure, there's going to be. Nothing comes easy, and there's going to be some bumps in the road. But I think when we look back at this, even like 6 months from now, we're going to look back and say, we had some people that were kind of on edge in March, April, May that really didn't need to be. The stock market's going to come back, and the overall impact of this is those that hang in the stock market are going to come out fine, and we're going to put this uncertainty stuff behind us.
Okay. And you mentioned the reciprocal tariffs, which are scheduled to come into effect April 2nd. And so much of these numbers that we hear about this industry and that industry, we're hearing, 25% seems to be a popular number that everyone's
Mm.
kind of throwing around. But it seems unlikely that there's just going to be dueling 25% tariffs in effect long term on all these different industries. If anything, it seems like a negotiation strategy to really get to a manageable number on both sides to where, no, both sides can live with it, and no one is going to be, particularly the U.S., won't be tariffed so unfairly at these rates that we hear, whether it's a couple 100% in some cases, whether on dairy or on other important industries. Do you agree with that?
I absolutely do, Dave. And I think that once we get the reciprocal tariffs in place, that'll beget a round of retaliatory tariffs, and then the negotiation will begin. I think there's a couple of levels of uncertainty here. Certainly, where that negotiation goes is important. But then once it's done, once the dust is settled and we've decided, okay, here is what's fair. I mean, it's not fair for me to put a tariff on you of 50% and you to put a tariff back on me at 5%. We need to level up the playing field. We need to be fair. Everyone kind of gets what fair is. Now, can we get down to the third decimal point? Absolutely not, because there's so many variables here. But we do need to be able to look at these tariffs and get something settled, and then it's going to be somewhat back to normal steady state until someone goes off and does something weird. The challenge with that then is, what do companies do with tariffs? And a question that I've been asking the folks I talk to on the phone, and I primarily talk to the C-level people, I talk to finance people, and I talk to supply chain people, and I talk to procurement people. And I've asked them, I said, at your company, and now I'm talking sometimes Fortune 20 companies, sometimes I'm talking Fortune 5,000 companies. So small, medium, large companies. I asked them the question, who has tariffs at your company? That seems like it's a relatively simple question, but no matter how many folks I ask, I get almost nothing for an answer. They say, well, procurement is involved in deciding what countries we go to from a sourcing point of view. And so that impacts the tariffs. I said, but if the tariffs change, does sourcing come in and make a different? Well, not necessarily. The ones that know when the tariff changes, that's primarily finance, because they're the ones that administrate and pay those tariffs. And so that's more in the finance department. I said, well, but is somebody at the C level asking the question, should we change our supply chain so as to reduce tariffs? And they're saying, well, yeah, the C level is asking that. And oftentimes they ask that from the supply chain people's perspective. And the supply chain people say, well, we're not tariff people. We're trying to make the flow of goods and the flow of information. But as far as the taxes and that stuff, that's finance and that's procurement. And so what we got is finance, procurement, supply chain, C level, all kind of passing the buck as to who's in charge of this tariff thing. Well, I believe that in companies, as tariffs change, if it's appropriate, we need to look at what the impacts are and what changes we should make. So sometimes they put a 10% tariff on something and the impact is 10%. Oftentimes they'll put a 10% tariff on something and the impact on the cost of the item is 0.1%. And so it just depends on what the cost of those items that are tariffed is. It's how those costs build up, and where are those costs build up? Where is the profit being taken? And so we need to understand first, what is the percent increased in cost as a result of that 10% or 25% tariff? That's the first question we got to get an answer to. Then once we get that answer, we got to answer the question. If we move that out of Vietnam and we moved it to Malaysia, would the tariff be less? If we moved it to India, would the tariff be less? If we moved it to Mexico, would the tariff be less? And we need to look at those things. So what I did then, I came up with the word re-globalization. And reglobalization, as we have discussed, is looking at what our supply chain looks like and how do we alter that supply chain so as to get the total landed cost, including tariffs, at a minimal level. And so that's what we want to accomplish. Well, so we made a decision. We're going to buy the product in Thailand, and it's going to go to Mexico and then come to the U.S. A tariff gets put in place, and all of a sudden that increases the cost by 7%. Well, is there an alternative that we can do that allows us to save that 7%. Well, so we now do this, and that 7% goes down to 2%. We say, we just saved 5%. That's what I would call re-globalization. Now, if you looked at that today, what happened is that's the decision we made at 2 o'clock, but at 4 o'clock, they changed that tariff and it went back to this. And so now we're going to have to re-globalize. And then tomorrow morning, there's going to be a new retaliatory tariff. And so now we got to globalize. And so we're going to get kind of confused here. I think this is the globalization because we've had to change it so much. So instead of getting confused with my re's, we've invented the term DSCO, where DSCO is dynamic supply chain optionality that says we have a dynamic list of options. And if this happens, we can do this. If this happens, we can do this. If this happens, we can do this. And that's not something to play out when they're negotiating. But once they're done negotiating, let's look at that picture and say, what if this happens? What if this happens? And be ready to respond accordingly. That's not procurement's problem. That's not finance problem. That's not supply chain. That's the whole company. We got to work together. So we got to get the supply chain guys, the procurement guys, the finance guys, get them together and say, guys, we need to have a DSEO plan. We need to have a dynamic supply chain optionality plan that allows us to minimize our cost and allow us to become even more successful going forward and building the wealth of the firm. And then the stock goes up and then everyone smiles again.
Right. And the process you just laid out, companies, particularly bigger companies, are not used to having to make such pivots so quickly, as the pace of the change with these tariffs and the way things are moving is faster than ever before. So people that are used to having months and maybe even years to put steps like this in place that now have to maybe turn on a dime, and they need some expert help in developing like a dynamic supply chain optionality strategy. What would you recommend they do in terms of seeking out expert help?
Well, you need to work with someone that really understands risk management because that's what this really is trying to manage the risks of the different tariffs changing. There are supply chain firms that do that type of work. We've developed a specific technology to allow that to be put in place and to allow tariffs to be massaged and understood. That gives us the minimal cost operation. And I would think there's probably some other firms you can find that do similar things. Maybe talk to your CPA, maybe talk to your risk management people, maybe talk to us. We'd be happy to help. And so I think that's a really important thing to do because it's an area of expertise that companies just haven't developed because they don't need to. These rules are in place, they last for 10 years. And so you kind of do your thing and now off you go. But this dynamic nature has really changed up on that. And, I think I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're, kind of keeping track of how things are going. Um, it looks like we might be making some progress in Ukraine, although it appears Putin is kind of dragging his feet a little bit now. And Trump has said, I'd rather negotiate with Putin than I would with Ukraine because at least we know we're kind of on the same page. And so that's taking place. Another thing that's really interesting to me is this announcement that President Trump made in his uh, uh, inaugural his speech last Tuesday on the shipbuilding activity, and then now we know that BlackRock now controls the Panama Canal. BlackRock made an acquisition that gives them the ports on the west and the east side of the Panama Canal. That, if we wanted to really kind of be nasty, we could call that's the U.S. Belt and Road process. Now, the Belt and Road process, that's a China term. And so China's been going all over the world, making huge investments And the purpose of that investment is to control supply chains. Well, the BlackRock acquisition of those two ports is very significant, but that's not all they got. BlackRock also in that deal picked up ports in Australia, Egypt, Mexico, Poland, Korea, Thailand, Sweden, Pakistan, Iraq, Oman, UK, Netherlands, and the Bahamas. And so this is a huge Belt and Road US win for us. So, it's changing the game again, just like everything else we was talking about. And so I think it's very cool that we're going to be building ships in the United States. That's important both from a military point of view and from a commercial point of view. And I think it's very important. Trump said we're going to take the Panama Canal back. Everyone said, oh, that's impossible. It won't happen. Well, guess what? We got it back.
Yeah. Yeah, well pointed out. Um, okay, and Jim, like, so you mentioned your firm as well. If people don't know what Tompkins Ventures is, how it can help, and how it may differ from other high-level consulting firms that they might be familiar with, what can they expect when they come to Tompkins Ventures?
Well, number one, they'll find that they are dealing with the senior level executives who are not trying to sell consulting services. And so what we do is we sit down with the client, we really understand what their needs are, and then we look at those needs and we say, who do we know who solves this problem? Who's the transportation company? Who's the third party logistics? Who's the technology provider? And let's get the real solution provider and bring them in. We give them the orientation, and then we do matchmaking. We say, client, here's the solution, here's a client, and we put them together for no fee at all. The people we bring to the table will develop for the client the solution, the savings, and how they need to move forward to make this happen. The client then has a choice of saying, no, thank you, we don't want to do that. Or yes, we will do that. And then they'll pay for the fee for the transportation. And in that fee of the transportation is a small commission that comes to us for doing the introduction. So we're getting the marketing fee, if you will, off of the solution provider. The client is getting the solution at no increased cost. They're just getting all the benefit. And so it's a very unique model. Tompkins Ventures is an ecosystem of over 230 business partners, of over 150 people that do, you know, provide products and services to the clients, over thousands of capital partners. And then we do have consulting partners who are needed to put these various things together and do implementations. So we have an ecosystem that is larger than the 5 largest consulting firms combined, but we don't pay for their overhead, and so we don't have high overhead costs. We just bring them together in an ecosystem, and then we say, okay, for this project, we need this, this, and this. We put it together, and now we provide the client with a solution. So it's a very different type of model, and I think it fits the times we're in today because the problems are big, they're complex, and they need a holistic view, and we bring that.
Okay, and if people want to get in touch and learn more and how you can help them, what's the best way they can do that?
It's just right. J Tompkins at tompkinsventures.com. JTOMPKINS at TOMPKINSVENTURES.com.
All right. We'll link that in the show notes. Jim, as always, it's been a wonderful conversation. Great to be with you and go over all these important topics and how it affects the supply chain at large and how people can prepare and respond effectively to best benefit their business. So thank you once again.
Dave, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.